Hi, everyone, and welcome back to MNGT 4900 for week 3. This week, we're going to be talking about what's called the generic business level strategies, or essentially the generic ways in which a firm structures itself in order to outcompete its rivals. Okay? So, a lot of interesting stuff in here, and hopefully at the end of this module, you'll be able to look at a firm and essentially determine from a broad level how they make money, how they choose to compete against other people in their specific spaces. Okay? So as usual, this is not meant to be an exhaustive overview of both of the chapters that are assigned this week. Rather, this is essentially serving as a highlight reel and drawing attention to some of the more nuanced elements, and then just offering you some additional detail regarding a lot of the concepts that are presented in this chapter. So you still need to read the chapter, obviously, to get all of the information available here, but I wanted to, again, give this as something to help you along. So without further ado, I'll try to make this as quick as possible here. So we'll talk about business level strategies. Now, we differentiate this from other types of strategies. All right? So business level are all strategies that essentially being used in a particular industry or a specific product market. All right. We might have a corporate level strategy that deals with higher level corporate issues like, how much of our corporation should be debt financed? What's our merger and acquisition policy? How are we going to treat strategic alliances? What sort of product markets should we compete in? All right. So that's broad. A business level strategy looks at a specific industry and determines how we're going to compete in that. At the lower level of strategy, we have our functional level strategy. And this would guide the various functions of the basic functions of a business and ask questions like, okay, what's our human resource management strategy going to be? What's our marketing strategy going to be? Right? And essentially how that fits in with the rest of the firm. All right, but here we're just going to be focusing on the biggest, or the business level strategy. So the ultimate goal here is to create a difference between our firm and our rivals. All right, a difference between our firm and our rivals. Now, the only two ways that we can create a difference between our firm and another firm. Now, this is kind of the wild point here, that you take a look at all of the thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of different businesses that exist in the world, right? There are only two ways with which they can differ, or they can create differences between themselves and rivals, right? They can either perform the same actions that everybody else is doing, but do them differently, or they can perform different activities, okay? So usually here when we say perform, let me just pull up my highlighter here, perform activities differently, what we're saying is, okay, we're going to do maybe the same stuff as you, but we're going to do it at a lower cost. All right? Or we're going to perform different activities and we're going to use them to differentiate ourselves from you. Hence, why Porter back in 1985, all the way back in 1985, so well over 35 years old, all right, originally said that there are two value-adding configurations of the firm. You can either be a low-cost leader, all right, or you can differentiate. So when you ask this question, why would somebody buy our particular product? Okay, this value proposition. Ultimately, it would boil down to, well, they're shopping at us because we're cheaper than the person down the street, or there's something else built in to our strategy, or something else built into our firm that differentiates us from rivals. Okay? So the two value-added configurations here. So I have these listed. So this is our differentiation here, or listed as uniqueness, and our low cost right here. So this is our source of our value-added configuration. Now we can add one more element to this, with which it's called our competitive scope. Okay, who do we want to target? Do we want to target a bunch of different consumer groups? Now you may recall from your marketing class the idea of a consumer segment. Okay, so this applies here. Are we going to target a bunch of different consumer segments, or are we going to target a few? Okay, so when we take these two options, so our choice of target and then our source of competitive advantage, our value-added configuration, and we put them into our graph here, this is where we get our business level, our generic business level strategies. Okay? So, cost leadership, a broad targeted cost leadership strategy. This is a firm targeting as many customers as possible and doing so by having as cheap a cost as possible. All right? Think of Walmart right here. Okay, Walmart. They have products for all sorts of different needs, all sorts of different consumers. They have sporting goods. They have housewares. All right? They have electronics. They have food. Okay? They have clothing, all that sort of stuff. All right? So a broad target on different consumer segments. And generally, the way that they compete is by having cheap stuff. Okay? Compare that to maybe like Macy's over here. Macy's has a lot of similar things. They sell like kitchenware, all right? They sell clothing, all right? All sorts of different stuff with relation to different consumer segments. But they're getting you in the store by being different, by, in this case, being perceived as higher quality, better goods. And hopefully, if they're executing their strategy well, you are more willing to pay that additional price premium because of that perceived quality, because they're differentiating. Okay? Now, if we go with a narrow target, all right, so we have what we call a focused strategy. So this would be a focused cost leadership strategy. Now, you can think of this as maybe like either a low-cost kind of one-trick pony sort of store, or maybe like a Dollar General or something like that, okay, versus a focused differentiation. All right, focused differentiation is a firm that is targeting a narrow consumer group, but they're doing so by doing different things. Think of your small, like, hometown bike shop, all right, bicycle store, all right? Bicycle store is only catering to one narrow consumer segment, and that is people who are interested in bikes, all right? But most of the time, your neighborhood bike store is differentiating themselves in a lot of different ways. So think about this. How would a firm like our little narrow bike store here compete with a broad cost leader like Walmart? There is never going to be a time, or maybe very few times, when a firm like this, our little bike shop, is going to be able to compete against Walmart based upon price. Yet we know that these two firms still exist next to each other in the marketplace, and they're both can be relatively successful. So why is this firm successful as well as this firm here? Okay, why would you shop at your neighborhood bike store and also shop at Walmart? All right, so take a second and think about that. Pause the video if you have to. So the answer hopefully can be quite clear if you have gone to these stores before. So think about what the experience would be is if you're a cyclist, a bicycle enthusiast, okay, and you went to Walmart and maybe you asked them a question, for example, about maybe a new Cell Italia seat. Okay, how comfortable, what's this going to feel like maybe after a 60-kilometer, 70-kilometer ride? All right, how would you compare this in terms of quality to these brands here? Imagine asking questions like that, right? They're probably going to look at you funny and not answer your question, not be able to answer your question, all right? Versus if you go here, okay, you've probably met with superior levels of customer service. They know their products very intimately. They're able to help you, and they carry maybe much more stuff related to bikes, okay, such as different parts, okay, higher quality parts, okay, other different types of accessories. So the sacrifice that we make with this broadly focused strategy is that we have a lot of different product lines, but they're very shallow. So yeah, we carry some bikes, we carry a few bike accessories, maybe like some chains, maybe some different seats and some helmets and stuff like that, but that's it. Versus a focused differentiator who has a very narrow product line. It's only stuff related to bicycles, but it's very deep. And they have, most of the time, the customer service to back it up. Okay? So we would still shop at this, right, for all of these reasons versus a cost leadership. So interesting kind of strategic question here. Now, in the center, and this is kind of hard to do, right, we call it an integrated cost leadership differentiation, where, or a best cost strategy, where given our level of differentiation, we're trying to be in a low price point. Okay, essentially giving you the best, trying to give you the best of both worlds versus integrated cost leadership and differentiation. And you might think of this as maybe kind of close to maybe like Target, for example. Target is still a pretty low-cost firm, but they're differentiating themselves more and more versus their rivals like Walmart, things like that. Okay, so that is essentially, in a nutshell, the 5 generic level strategies here. So I'll burn through them pretty quickly here. This is just a write-up of essentially what I've talked about. So the reason why cost leadership works is because you have the lowest price and you probably have better margins than competitors. All right? So essentially you're doing everything to deliver your goods and services with features that are acceptable to customers at the lowest cost. All right? And you're continually reducing costs of your value chain activities. Okay? And actually, if you have the low cost position, it can be a valuable defense against rivals. All right? So what drives low cost? All right? Well, most of the time, we see a low cost strategy driven by what we call major cost drivers here. The biggest one I want to bring your attention to is economies of scale. Now, you might be familiar with economies of scale. You might not remember this. What this means is this is the efficiencies that we gain by virtue of the size of our organization. Okay? So think about, let's say we have a little shoe company, our own little private shoe company or something like that. And we have fixed costs. If you remember what fixed costs are, they're costs that do not change, okay, relative to how many products you sell. So this could be like the rent, for example, or the price of our insurance. All right. So let's say we're renting a facility for $5,000 a month. And we only manage to sell one pair of shoes. All right. That means we have to sell that one pair of shoes for $5,000 in order just to cover our fixed costs of rent. Okay. But if we up our scale and we happen to sell 5,000 pairs of shoes that month, we only have to sell each for $1 just to cover the fixed costs of our rent. All right. So the more and more units we sell, essentially what happens is we can actually drive our price down, okay, through economies of scale. I'll just run through these really quickly here. So learning and spillovers. So just the knowledge that we acquire over time, our skills that we develop allow us to push costs down. If we utilize more of our capacity, all right, so let's say we can utilize, or we have a production facility that allows us to produce like 10,000 shoes a month. We want to utilize as much of that capacity as possible, effectively utilize it. All right, so we want to produce as close to our capacity as possible. Because think about it, if we have a capacity to produce 10,000 and we're only producing 5, we're still paying rent, and our other machines are just sitting idle, so it's costing us money, and we're not utilizing them for anything. But that doesn't mean produce extra shoes or whatever just for the sake of producing them. We have to be able to sell them as well. All right, so if you're just producing stuff to add to inventory, then you might have to think maybe about reducing your capacity in order to gain better efficiency. Better integration across your multiple firms. Vertical linkages, so this is vertical integration. So let's say you own the supplier or own the raw material producer, something like that. So the more linkages you can create up your supply chain, things like that, or what have you. Okay, so I mean, you can peruse these, go through the rest of them yourself here, but essentially those are the main things. Those are the major cost drivers. But we also have discretionary decisions that we can make as managers. All right, so we can either maybe reduce the features of our product, reduce the overall performance in order to make it cheaper to produce, reduce our product mix. So instead of focusing on a wide variety of products, maybe we only focus on producing a few, thus to get better economies of scale. Maybe we experiment with lower service levels, better process technology, hiring, different training elements, things like that. Okay, wage, maybe we pay our employees less, something like that. Okay, so these are all, we call them discretionary because it's kind of up to us as managers in order to make decisions about these. But there's a lot of things that we can do at a product level or a firm level, discretion, with our own discretion, that could influence the low cost nature of our particular product. All right, so when you're thinking about this, a good rule from, or a thought experiment to have is, how would you implement a low cost strategy for your company? All right, given this particular information. All right, so think about that for a bit, if you can. Okay? So this is just a written version of what I was just talking about. So you're either, you can achieve cost leadership by trying to gain economies of scale or reduce your operating costs in some way, maybe through greater standardization. BIC, for example, is a great case study in terms of a cost leadership strategy. They have standardized products. They were one of the first to create standardized pins, and they're incredibly cheap. And I'm going to be posting a video of BIC to the webpage where I post this video lecture that you can look at as well. It's really cool stuff. Okay, so cost leaders are good because they are in a position to absorb price increases, or because they're buying such a huge volume of products, as in the case of Walmart, that they can actually force suppliers to hold down their prices. All right? And if you're constantly improving your levels of efficiency for cost reduction, essentially what's happening is you are creating something that is really difficult to replicate, and it can create an entry barrier to potential customers. So, cost leaders hold a really attractive position with relation to product substitutes because they have such flexibility that they might be able to lower prices in order to retain customers. So I just put some examples here. Greyhound, Big Lots, Walmart, all that good stuff here. All right, so if you remember 5 forces from last week, rivalry, power of buyers, power of suppliers, threat of new entrants, threat of substitutes. All right, so let's take a look at how this strategy attempts to overcome unfavorable forces. So LCL and rivalry, if you successfully occupy the low-cost position, competitors might be very hesitant to engage in a price war with you. So you could probably still earn above-average returns even after your rivals have competed away their own profits. With the bargaining power of buyers, if buyers successfully bargain the prices of competitors down to your level, the idea here is that if you are more efficient, your competitors are not going to be able to sustain their operations. All right? And then they may get out rather than earn below average profits. Okay? So if that happens, demand's going to shift to you, and because demand is shifting to you, you're actually lowering the bargaining power of buyers. It's kind of the same thing, but reverse for bargaining power of suppliers. So you're the big stack bully here. All right? You have the low cost position, you can better absorb cost increases, and if you have dominant market share, you can keep supplier prices low. With new entrants, Usually, a low-cost leader has to produce and sell in large volumes in order to earn above-average returns. Okay, again, it makes sense. Since they're focused on reducing costs and improving efficiency, a low-cost leader develops hard-to-imitate core competencies. New entrants would need to enter the market at a very large scale in order to match the volume of the low-cost leader or be satisfied with low profits until they develop the same efficiencies. Okay, so difficult to get into the market at the same scale as you. And substitutes, all right, you're generally more attractive than substitute products, and you can easily reduce prices if people start to move away towards substitute products. Okay, so you can pause it here. Here's just a quick little bulleted breakdown of low-cost leader and each of the 5 forces. Okay, so risks. Usually with this, there can be one clear cost leader in the marketplace. There's not room for a lot of cost leadership firms. A change in technology could potentially eliminate whatever cost advantage you have. So a new manufacturing technique or a new type of product might allow other firms to start producing at a price level or cost level commensurate with yours. All right. You might get, and we call this a knowledge spillover. That's when what you do kind of like spills over and gets picked up by other people. And so your knowledge, as it spills over to other firms, people start to imitate you, thus eroding your competitive advantage. And sometimes firms get so focused on reducing costs that they ignore their targeted investments in things that they might need to invest in, like consumer preferences, for example. So just because you have an overall low-cost leadership strategy doesn't mean that you need to reduce costs across the board. You still should be making targeted, wise investments, and it might be in your employees, paying them well, training them well in order to provide good customer service, or maybe other product features or something like that. Okay? So that's a low-cost leadership strategy. Now, a differentiation strategy is you're producing and deliver goods in some way that adds value to the product, and so consumers are perceiving that value and they're willing to pay more. All right? A differentiation strategy, you're usually not competing on price. All right? You're adding value and you're essentially charging more. All right? Some ways that companies differentiate or potentially add value to their product and make it so people are willing to pay more. The value proposition, to use some terms from week 1. All right? And I just listed some here, maybe a unique taste, integrated product platforms. So Apple has their whole ecosystem of products that work together, wide selection and one-stop shopping, reliable, superior service, so maybe Ritz-Carlton or FedEx. Caterpillar, heavy machinery company, spare parts availability. I mean, that could be a way of differentiating. Be differentiated on prestige, maybe quality manufacturing, as in the case of like Honda and Toyota, technological leadership, or just top-of-line image, okay, from like Ralph Lauren or something like that. So really any way under the sun that you can differentiate in, as long as it is perceived as adding value. All right? Some common ways that we see differentiation achieved is through quality, so using quality materials, quality production processes in order to produce a quality product, maybe employing skilled labor, maybe using high levels of compensation, or something like that. A lot of times there's marketing and branding involved. Right? So think of like Nike. There's a lot of marketing, a lot of branding that goes into creating this aura around their brand and setting yourself apart from competitors. Okay? And think of other things too, like brands like Gucci, Louis Vuitton, all that stuff. All right? So not only are you setting your company apart, you are maybe cultivating strong relationships with consumers, and maybe you engage in fast and prompt customer service or something like that. Other ways might be customizability. Okay? I can deliver a product that is uniquely suited to your particular need. Or maybe I employ good downstream networks. Maybe I have a wide variety of parts that are available. Customer service centers. I provide good customer support after the fact. All right. All different ways of differentiating your company. Okay. So how would you, and again, a good thought experiment here is if you were your particular company or maybe a company that you have in your head, how would you pursue a differentiation strategy for that particular company? Okay. So pause. Think about that question for a little bit before we move on here. All right. So differentiation strategy. Essentially, by either reducing downstream costs or increasing downstream performance for our customers, all right, essentially what we're saying is we are adding to the buyer's value. All right. So let's say we are reducing their processing time, reducing their search time, or reducing something called transaction costs or defect rates or direct costs or learning curves. Okay? Or maybe they're saving on labor or space or installation time or what have you. All of those are contributing to the buyer's value, this value proposition that your company is providing. All right? Hence, that might increase their willingness to purchase your product. Right? So bottom line, adding value to a product allows differentiators to charge a premium over low-cost producers. So think about this. Think about like the last product that you've bought that wasn't based upon price. You know, what eventually encouraged you to go with that particular product versus a competitor's? You know, what were the features? What were the elements of that product that led you to purchasing that particular product? Okay. So we'll go through the 5 forces again and how a differentiation strategy stacks up or tries to overcome unfavorable forces. So we'll start with rivalry. Brand loyalty, other sources of value, means that consumers might be more price inelastic. All right. If you remember price elasticity from your economics class, all that means is that a 1 unit, so inelastic means that a 1 unit change in price predicts less than a 1 unit change in demand. Fancy way of saying that as prices go up, okay, people would still kind of stick around. All right. Highly differentiated products and services may be very difficult for your rivals to copy. Bargaining power of buyers. Highly differentiated products may have very few alternatives and substitutes. All right. And because there's lack of options, your buyers probably have to go with you, and that reduces their ability to bargain prices down or negotiate. Kind of the same thing again reversed, but with bargaining power of suppliers. Differentiators are in a better position to pass supplier price increases on to consumers, and because of few substitutes, people may be more willing to pay higher prices. New entrants, successful differentiators have a wide range of attributes that are difficult for new entrants to copy. Therefore, they create strong entry barriers. All right. So, for example, Nike, right? The benefits that accrue to Nike from having a superior brand image that has taken years to develop, a new entrant will need to really invest heavily into building those sort of resources, those core competencies, in order to become competitive. Okay? Substitute products. Attributes such as customer loyalty may prevent customers from switching to a substitute product, or in the case of a highly differentiated product, maybe an adequate substitute just might not exist for what your consumer is trying to accomplish. All right? So you can pause the video here on this slide. This is just a bulleted breakdown of each of the 5 forces and how they stack up with a differentiator here, how a differentiator tries to overcome each of these. All right. It's not without risks, though. So you could have your competitive value being eroded by either a low-cost counterfeit or imitators. You could differentiate on characteristics not valued by buyers. Wow. We're going to go into this one in a little bit here. over differentiating, becoming too specialized, too specific. Okay, price premium is too high. Now, we can think of this spectrum of low cost to a differentiation as a kind of a continuous spectrum. All right. There is never a time when a firm solely focuses on either low cost or differentiation. You cannot be a differentiator and completely ignore price. You cannot solely focus on price and completely ignore differentiation. So usually, like in the case of Walmart or in the case of like Louis Vuitton, their dominant strategy might be a differentiation or low-cost leadership, right? But they still consider the other elements to a degree, all right? So we're really focusing on dominant strategies. So in a differentiator, maybe you've overvalued and your price premium is now too high. You've ignored cost and people don't want your product, all right? Or maybe you have a value, but you fail to signal to consumers what that value actually is, all right? Or maybe you ignore the rest of your value chain or something like that. So you focus on your product instead of the entire value chain, all right? So a lot of different risks here. So I want to focus on this, differentiated on characteristics not valued by buyers. And I have some examples here, all right? Colgate, if you remember them, differentiate or tried to move into the product market and use their brand clout. They created TV dinners, right? And this particular strategy, as you might know, was not successful because what do you think of when you think of Colgate? Well, you probably think of toothpaste. So when I ask what this TV dinner would taste like, you probably would think, oh, it's going to taste minty fresh or something like that. Right? So differentiating on an element not valued by buyers. This one caught a lot of flack. This one was ridiculed quite a bit. It made it onto the Ellen DeGeneres show, Ellen, where it was further harangued, and a lot of people posted on social media. Bic tried to differentiate their products at one point by creating a product line called Bic for Her. All right? And the idea here is what is, and I'll ask this specifically to women in the audience here. What is it specifically about a pin? Your female physiology that you need a specific pin for you. All right? So this was seen as differentiated on something that didn't matter. Okay? Women didn't need their own specific pin. All right? Thus it didn't take off. Bic, again, also produced disposable underwear at one point. They tried to capitalize upon this particular market. All right? These also did not take off. Okay? Kind of incompatible with the brand. And in this case, didn't signal the value of their particular product. New Coke was another example here. So New Coke, Coca-Cola at one point tried to create a new Coca-Cola flavor, and people hated it. So, well, they hated it because it was like they felt that it was getting away from the Coca-Cola that they grew up with, something that they already differentiated on. All right, so this was such a flop, a monumental flop, that they killed it and started selling Coca-Cola Classic. That's why they call it Coke Classic now, because of the new Coke. All right, and then the last one was Wow chips and Olestra. So one of the things that differentiated chips, these Lay's brand chips, the Wow brand made with Olestra, is that Olestra was a substance that actually bound itself to fat deposits in the chip and prevented them from being absorbed by your intestines. All right. So what this meant was that you could have these kind of full fat tasting chips, but you wouldn't absorb the fat, and thus you wouldn't get the calories from them. So a technological innovation that the Lay's company tried to differentiate on. However, the problem with this particular product And in this case, the differentiate on something that consumers wholly rejected is that not only did it prevent you from absorbing various vitamins, but it actually caused loose stools. You would have an accident in pub, or you potentially have an accident after eating this product, and because of the physiological effects that it had. All right. So a lot of examples out there of companies trying to differentiate on different factors, trying to be technologically innovative, and then ultimately falling flat. All right. I could go on, and those are some kind of main fun ones here. But for the sake of time, so let's talk really quickly about focus strategies. All right. So when you adopt a focus strategy, you maintain the elements of the competitive strategy, but you focus on a narrow target market. All right. And like I say here, the focuser can provide features, customization, knowledge, and experience that may be beyond the scope of the industry-wide producer. So our little specialized, focused bike shop. Okay. So, and actually what's interesting is Walmart operated under a focused cost leadership strategy in its early days. So when Walmart was first founded, they had really big name retail stores out there. So they had Kmart, they had Sears, all sorts of other companies, these big players in the marketplace. And so what Walmart did is they chose to focus on specific geographic segments. They only located themselves in rural communities that were relatively ignored by these large retail producers, or these large retail stores. So by adopting this strategy, by going to these underserved locations and providing them with cheap goods, Walmart was able to grow. They found that niche in the market and ultimately becoming where they are today. Or focused differentiation. I put Aston Martin, Ferrari, Lamborghini. They focus on these high-end supercar markets and things like that. But, you know, plenty of other examples that aren't that extreme as well. All right, drivers of a focus strategy. A focus strategy attempts to exploit narrow target difference from the balance of the industry by either isolating and focusing on a particular buying group or a unique segment of a product line, okay, concentrating on a geographic market like Walmart, essentially just finding a niche. All right. And I've answered this question already. How do small businesses compete with large retail giants? All right. We can look at the elements of a focus strategy and figure that out. And then here, again, this thought prompt for you. How might you pursue a focus strategy for your own business or a business that you have in your head here? Okay. So, yeah, pause. Think about this particular question. So, as with the others, we'll go through the 5 forces really quickly. So, a focus strategy means that you are uniquely serving a target market. All right. So, with regards to rivalry, a broad differentiator or a low-cost leader, ideally, they cannot be able to meet that segment's needs as well as you can if you're the focused firm. All right. So, you are targeting a very narrow segment, but dang, you are doing everything you can to meet the unique needs of that particular consumer segment. With regards to buyers, you have highly specialized products and services. So what this means is there's probably few alternatives. All right. So lack of options are going to reduce their power. With your suppliers, all right, this actually represents somewhat of a threat in this instance because the firm has low volume and specialized products which only a few suppliers produce. So that means you're kind of at a disadvantage. However, ideally, you're going to be able to pass those costs onto the consumer. All right. With new entrants, you are highly focused, so you have the ability or the opportunity to develop very specialized core competencies that may be very difficult for a new entrant to replicate. And with substitutes, hopefully, if you're focusing well with your product and your associated core competencies, there's going to be very few products out there that would provide the same level of value to your consumer. All right, so that's the 5 forces here. With risks, right, a firm might potentially be out-focused. There's a risk of being out-focused. or a competitor with a large competitor with their vastly larger stores of resources, financial and then intangible otherwise, might be able to set your sights on your particular niche market, or maybe your niche market changes. Maybe their preferences change to match those of the broad market, thus eroding your particular source of competitive advantage. So it's not without its risks. Okay? So here are all of the generic strategies and then all of the industry 5 forces. Okay? And then again, how this strategy attempts to position itself in relation to the 5 forces in order to be successful. So feel free to pause, take a screenshot of this particular slide, right, and then make references back to it if you need to. All right. So lastly is the integrated strategy. That's the best cost. It's trying to get the best of both worlds, low cost and differentiation. So you're delivering the highest quality or the highest level of differentiation for a particular price point. All right, and you're usually doing this through a pursuit of both efficiency and differentiation. So it's kind of cool if you can actually get into this space, because theoretically you should be in a position to quickly adapt to environmental changes. You're in a position where you can learn new skills and technologies really quickly, and you can better leverage your core competencies while still competing against your rivals. Although, with all of the benefits here, so if you're pursuing this particular strategy, you're essentially offering 2 types of value to your consumers. You have a lot of differentiated features, but it's also relatively low cost. All right, but you're not as low as the cost leader's price, but people are still willing to pay for your goods because of that added differentiation. All right. So same question, how would you pursue an integrated strategy for your firm? Something for you to think about. So with all the potential benefits, there are some very, oh my gosh, I forgot about this slide here. So some ways that we create efficiency in this particular one, maybe you've heard of like TQM, Total Quality Management, maybe flexible manufacturing programs, or just like IT resources, so really good, robust information networks. These are all examples of ways of creating various levels of efficiency in your firm and how they're applied. All right, so that out of the way here, this is not without very significant risks. Okay? So with an integrated strategy, your firm is neither the lowest cost nor the most differentiated. All right? You get stuck in the middle. So your price is not low enough to reap the benefits of being a low-cost provider, and your product is really not differentiated enough in order to create adequate value. And in fact, the biggest example I would give you for this is Sears. Some of you might be old enough to remember shopping at Sears. Well, it's now bankrupt, right? It went away. At one point, I mean, it was a game changer in the United States in terms of being a retail giant, all right? But over time, what happened with Sears is that it got stuck in the middle. You had firms out there that were cheaper than Sears, so if you wanted lower cost goods of acceptable quality, you could go to places like Walmart, right, and get lower cost goods. But at the same time, if you wanted, better quality stuff, right, if you wanted to have higher quality goods, there were other places that you could go to as well. Right? So what happened is over time, Sears lost that value proposition to consumers. There was really no reason to go shop at them when you had all these other options as a consumer. So they got stuck in the middle, and it ultimately proved to be their downfall. So it's kind of like a high-risk, high-reward type strategy that you could potentially pursue. Okay. So that is it for the generic level strategies, the generic business level strategies. Hopefully, if you had some questions after doing the readings, that cleared some stuff up for you. I am happy to answer any further questions that you might have, so feel free to send me an email, shoot me a text, things like that. Happy to discuss this with you further. So, yeah. With that being said, take care and enjoy the rest of the day.